A scandal could erupt at any moment. Everything was hanging by a thread. They had come to such a perfect arrangement. The Neapolitan princess was to marry Cesare Borgia, while the French king would finally get his long-desired divorce to enter a new union. But then, of all things, that dim-witted Carlotta fell in love with some Breton. The situation needed urgent fixing. Cesare needed a new bride, and the king chose Charlotte, sister of the Navarre monarch. A lovely and noble girl, she was a perfect replacement for the Neapolitan princess. In fact, she was much better. Charlotte Albright was born in March 1480th year into a distinguished French family, from which the famous Constable Charles I hailed, who perished at the Battle of Agincourt. Over the centuries, the Albright family had allied with many respected Aquitanian and Gascon families, but most importantly, with the royal family. One of the Albrights had married Marguerite de Bourbon in the 14th century, gaining the countship of Dreux through her. Charlotte's brother had successfully married the sole heiress of the Kingdom of Navarre and was proclaimed king in Pamplona. In short, Charlotte belonged to the highest echelons of French nobility. But this young lady had more to be proud of than just her noble name. Charlotte was enchanting, graceful and slender. Her dark chestnut hair could be styled into the most elaborate hairstyles, and the beauty of her large blue eyes could rival even the renowned beauty of Brittany. In fact, Charlotte served as one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, and of Brittany became queen under Charles VIII, but he died in an accident. Louis XII was proclaimed king, and he was eager to divorce his wife. Louis was married to the unattractive and barren Princess Jean, and now, as the ruler, he dreamed of marrying and of Brittany. It wasn't just Anne's beauty that attracted the king. It was likely that her looks had faded somewhat after numerous pregnancies. However, Anne brought her Duchy of Brittany to the crown, and after her husband's death, she could reclaim it once she regained her freedom. A considerable territory, which had once sparked many conflicts, now threatened to become independent again. Naturally, that couldn't be allowed. The Breton Rose laid down a strict condition. She would agree to wait exactly 1 year. If, within that time, King Louis resolved his divorce issue, she would be ready to marry him. The challenge was to secure that divorce, which could only be granted by the Pope. The interests aligned. The Pope was planning to marry his son, Cesare Borgia, to a suitable princess. The King of France needed a divorce to marry his beloved Anne. A deal was struck, a divorce in exchange for a bride. And so, the envoys from Rome set off for France. It was a magnificent arrival. The Italians displayed such luxury that the French could only dream of it. A procession of richly dressed horsemen and carts laden with clothing, jewels, and artworks moved proudly along the roads of France. Cesare Borgia was riding toward his destiny, which had already been arranged for him. Carlotta of Aragon from the Kingdom of Naples. But Louis's plans were shattered by the foolish romantic entanglement of Princess Carlotta. Falling in love with a Breton nobleman, she flatly refused to marry Cesare Borgia. In a panic, his plans were on the brink of collapse. The king urgently sought a replacement. After negotiating with the Albright family, he offered their daughter, the 19-year-old beauty Charlotte, as a bride for Cesare. Agreement was reached, and both parties began preparing for the wedding. The bride's family was extremely anxious about the dowry. It was no easy task to secure an adequate sum for Charlotte, and negotiations were intense over every pound. After inheriting from his wife, the girl's father had gathered 30,000 livres. 6,000 would be paid to the groom immediately, while the remainder, according to the agreement, would be paid in installments of about 500 a year. In return, the bride was to receive 100,000 livres as a gift from the Pope, and one of her brothers was to be made a cardinal. Of course, the king was aware that Cesare was bringing the coveted divorce decree. Moreover, the Bishop of Ceuta had personally confirmed to him that the document existed. Without even seeing the paperwork, Louis celebrated his wedding to Anne of Brittany. So confident was he that everything would work out. However, the bishop was soon killed. Machiavelli, in his Fragments from Letters to the Council of Ten, claimed that Cesare had avenged a betrayal. But the truth was much simpler. Fernando Almeida died in January 1500 during the siege of Forli. The Borgia family's revenge had nothing to do with it. But let's return to the upcoming wedding. The future spouses had the chance to get to know each other better and were quite taken with one another. Machiavelli himself noted that Cesare Borgia was one of the most handsome men of his time. Charlotte and the Pope's son made a dazzling couple. After their wedding, they were to be known as the Duke and Duchess of Valentinois, and Cesare was also to receive the Order of St. Michael from the King of France. The wedding took place. The King and Queen personally honored the ceremony with their presence and looked very pleased. Everyone already knew that Anne of Brittany was expecting. Louis had finally gained the wife he had long desired, along with Brittany, which had nearly slipped from his grasp. He was gracious and charming. Cesare and Charlotte experienced the most peaceful and blissful time of their lives. They reveled in their youth, love, and each other's company, as if wanting to savor it for many months to come. And indeed, they knew that separation was imminent. Soon, Cesare Borgia was set to embark on a military campaign, and by the end of summer, his young wife realized she was pregnant. Duchess Charlotte, remaining in France, decided to stay in her homeland until she gave birth. In May 1500, she welcomed a daughter, whom she named Louise. She sent news of this to Cesare, who replied with a letter full of love and hope. His war was far from over, and there was no sign of a break in the fighting. He asked Charlotte to wait for their reunion. The moment they had been waiting for arrived when their daughter turned 2 years old. It was planned for the Duchess of Valentinois to come to Rome for Easter, of course with Louise in tow. But just as everything was ready for departure, Charlotte fell ill with a fever, and the trip had to be postponed. A few days later, Cesare set off again with his troops. They were never to meet again. On the 12th of March 1507, Cesare Borgia was killed. When the news reached Charlotte, she went into mourning at her home, donned black, and never parted with the color again. The Duchess of Valentinois passed away in a dress as dark as night, outliving her one true love by 7 years. Their only daughter, Cesare Borgia and Charlotte's child, married twice and became the mother of 6 children. She died in 1553. But that is another story. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, give a like, and thank you for your comments.